Okay, so you're working on your floor plans, and we have these columns, right? And I mentioned earlier that we have the grid lines going vertically and horizontally, and everywhere the grid lines intersect we're going to have a column. And some of you have been trying to avoid putting a column on a grid line intersection because it affects your floor plan maybe. Well, we're going to have a column on every one of those grid lines. The only way to eliminate a column on a grid line is to make the beam that column is supporting much bigger, because the span now got twice as long as it was before. And we don't want to do that unless we have to, because that's a very costly thing to do. And then sometimes columns are all right. You can work around columns. You can place furniture up against a column, in a layout to make it work. A bad situation might be an office that has a column right in the middle. That would be unusable. But a large common space with a column in it where you could set a reception desk up against it and around it, or plant some furniture around a column, is not a bad thing. It can be actually a design feature in the building. So in some cases we can move the grid line. The disadvantage of moving a grid line is, again, the beam is going to change in size on one side or the other because you've shortened the span on one side and lengthened it on the other. So the beam could get bigger. The bar joists that span between those could also get bigger. So we're running into problems like that. The advantage of keeping everything kind of uniform is all of your beams end up being more uniform. All of your bar joists end up being more uniform. So we can work around that a little bit. In designing a commercial building, a big thing is to understand column placement and how you can work around them. Up on the screen I have a building that I'm working on here. It's probably different than what you're working on. But as you're working on your floor plan, you also need to be thinking about your exterior at the same time. So whenever you're working on your floor plan, make sure you every so often go look at your building in a 3D view and kind of see how things are working out. You kind of have to work the exterior and interior together to come up with a good design. You can come up with the greatest floor plan and have a really terrible looking exterior on the building if you aren't planning them together. So in my case here, I have raised a portion of my building. I've put a standing seam roof on part of it. And I've got a curtain wall to bring a lot of glass into my lobby area on the front side. We talked about having the back of our property tapering away about 5 feet to 6 feet lower on the back side than the front side. So on the back side of my building, I planned for my rear exit coming out being 5 foot lower than the main level. So I've done some things, and don't think that you have to do it exactly like I'm doing it. I'm just showing you some different options. Most of you, I assume, have put in columns into your building. At this point, we talked about them being on the grid line. And so as you'll notice in my building, obviously I've been a little more concerned with how my building is going to look on the outside and not so concerned with the inside yet, because I haven't put a lot of floor plan information in there. I've created 2 spaces that I will put walls and divide up into rooms and so forth later on. But I've just kind of created the different spaces that I'm working with, and then I will put the rooms into those later. Another thing you probably should be doing as you're developing your plan is throw some sections on, whether they're temporary or whether they're permanent. At this point is not that critical, but I raised the center part to get a higher ceiling, more open ceiling in my lobby area. So I put a section across to see what that would look like. Okay, so I got a section cutting through my building, and I've got a vaulted area with some clear-story windows up high in the level. I raised that about 3 feet above the main level, approximately. At this point, I'm also looking at this, and I can say, okay, I've got this roof in here, but how am I supporting that roof? Do I need a ridge beam up here, or do I need to create roof trusses to put up in there. Okay. Well, on the front of my building, I had an arch-topped curtain wall, right? So if I have an arch-top curtain wall, I don't want a bottom chord that's kind of intersecting that. So I'm going to do, at some point here, design a metal truss that has a curved bottom chord in it, probably. And the steel fabricators can make those for me, but I will at some point and show you what I'm designing there, but I'm not too concerned about that right now. Obviously, we have columns in here, so at some point I probably got columns that are going all the way up to this upper level also, and there's probably a beam up here someplace. So you have to be thinking of the structure and the design at the same time and thinking, what do I have to do to make this work? Okay, so that's something I'm working on there. Let's go back to the main floor plan then. Again, I have another section going through the opposite direction of this high part. And so then you can kind of see how this clear story window thing is working out up here. And I have some masonry that's concealing a column that's in here. If I were to click on this masonry wall and drag it down a little bit, it doesn't want to come down right now, but okay, there is a column being concealed by masonry in that point. At that point, okay. So, and then you can also see on this section how the lower level, 5 feet lower, is going to create a problem, and I'm going to have to create some stairway down to this rear entrance inside the building. Okay, so things I need to solve yet. Go back to the floor plan. And one of you mentioned, I think, about we have to box out these columns because they do extend into the interior space of the room a little bit. So we need to box around those columns, and as I walked around, I noticed that most of you have put a wall around those columns so that they're hidden, right? Well, I think you probably just went and picked a metal stud wall with sheetrock on it and wrapped them, right? That's probably what you did. Does the metal stud wall that you used have sheetrock on the inside of it?
No.
Or did you take it off? Okay, so if you just took the standard one, it has sheetrock on both sides, and there's no way to sheetrock the inside of that, right? So in my case, I created a new one. I'm going to change this to thin lines for a second. So I just created some furring. So I just created a new wall type. So if I click on this, I'll go look at that wall type. It's an interior 2 1/8 inch partition furring. Okay, so it's just as simple as I could and as close to the column as I could make that. I created a furring wall. If we go edit the type of that wall and look at the structure of it, on the exterior side it has a 1/2 inch gypsum. Right now it defaulted to 2 layers of gypsum, a 1/2 and a 1/4. I don't need that extra 1/4. I can delete that one. Okay, and then I have my core, which is a 1 5/8 inch metal furring stud. And then on the inside, I have another 1/2 inch, and I can delete that one as well. So I have 1/2 inch sheetrock on both sides. That, if we're going to fireproof this column, that should probably be 5/8 sheetrock, right? So let's just change that to 5/8. The 1/4 and the 1/2 would have done the same thing, I guess, but let's just go with 1 layer of 5/8. Okay, so it's a metal stud with 5/8 sheetrock. But again, I don't have any on the inside at all, right? So I can delete this one. So all it is a metal stud with 5/8 sheetrock on the outside. Okay, so I can say OK. Apply that, say OK. And now you see I have a metal stud with 5/8 sheetrock around it. And I didn't put it right up against the column. You want to leave a little tolerance there. We're not even going to dimension it. We're just going to call it out because we are going to leave that up to the builder to determine the best position to put it. So once you've created one of those, obviously you could mirror it over to this location. Mirror it down here. And when we have a column that has no walls around it, we can just put it on 3 sides. And if we have a column that's out in the middle of space, like this, we can go all the way around it with that kind of wall. So if I go out here and I go to a wall, architectural wall, it's defaulting to my 2 1/8 inch wall. I'm going to make those, my ceiling's going to be 10-foot ceiling, so I'm only going to fur it up to the ceiling. So I'm going to put in 10 foot. And I'm going to go, my location is going to be the core face of the interior of this wall. And I'm just going to hover over, and I'm going to go just around this column. And then I can show that way. Okay, let's see. Okay, it didn't default to my 10-foot height that I wanted it to. It remembered the last time I'd put a wall in, so that's why I'm not seeing much detail there. It should have been from level 1 up 10 foot. Why did I lose that one? Undo that. Base offset should be 0, excuse me. I had been working on that rear entrance, which was a base offset of -5 feet. That's why that showed up that way. Okay, so now I have my furring around that. If I throw some dimensions on here, I can make some adjustments and make that work out correctly, right? So in this case, I might take this wall and make that 1'4". And then if it's not centered on my column, I could do some modifications to make it centered on the column. Okay, so we don't have to fur these out any bigger than we have to. Then I'd get rid of those dimensions probably. Okay, so even though that column goes taller than the ceiling, we don't necessarily have to take the furring higher than where the ceiling is going to be. Okay, so that's all I really wanted to go over with you right now. So thinking about that, make some modifications to your building. Any questions?